Reflecting on weeks 2 and 3, it is quite inspiring that everything that we were talking about that I was hoping for with regard to enriching our forum conversations, um, all of those things are happening. You all are making very thoughtful conversations and posts that are grounded and supported, and you are um, agreeing without repeating or um, presenting differences, and um, and between you, you have created this amazing thinking machine that is really um, doing a kind of a powerful critical analysis of the issues. Thinking about internet savvy kids um, and their parents who are less so um, makes me think about the similarity with the dynamics that take place in immigrant families, um, in which kids are growing up in a completely different world than their parents. Um, Several people made the point that it is important for parents to take responsibility for learning about the internet and technology. And I would caution you that it takes a certain amount of time and resources, and therefore a privilege to um, actually be able to do that. And not to mention um, language um, issues. And so, um, from the perspective of people who have that privilege, it's easy to talk about what all parents should do, but all parents are not equipped to do that. As those of you know who depend on your kids to help you through DL coursework. Um, there's an interesting uh, parallel between this discussion um, on the internet and the relationship that um, creates between kids and parents, and the conversation that you had in the um, second week about free range kids and the differences in um, the expectations that parents had about their level of involvement in kids' lives. Um, it occurs to me that kids need freedom to um, explore and make mistakes, and um, should be taught about the consequences of um, and the mistakes on the internet, um, because some of those mistakes can be permanent. Once you've put something out there, it doesn't go away. But that also is very difficult to impress upon kids who um, uh, are immortal and um, focused on their own immediate realities and really not thinking toward the future. So I don't know, there may be just an inherent risk there. Um, uh, interesting conversation you're having about the effect that the internet is having on family relationships. Um, I remember going into a restaurant and seeing the two parents busy texting and actually being irritated at their children for interrupting them. Interesting way to go out to dinner together. Um, and several of you mentioned using the internet as a babysitter also. Um, and that actually made me think about uh, the importance of face to face interaction in learning social skills. And when we've talked about um, internet bullying, uh, we see an extreme example of a platform where antisocial behavior can be anonymous and without consequences. Um, Another issue you raised is um, the opportunity that the internet provides to present an imaginary self, and referring to, in particular, that girl in the documentary who uh, had who was so distraught when her parents told her that she could no longer use the internet to carry on um, that identity. Um, Several of you also talked about the teacher who said that kids' attention span is getting shorter, and and that brought me to thinking about Googling things rather than having to actually go find the answers to questions and go to the library and look it up and talk to people. And it's a completely different process of learning. And another issue is that um, what appears on Google, as you know, can often be a sort of a pasteurized process version, um, very far from the original information. Um, and those of you who grew up loving books know what I'm uh, saying also about the how much kids miss when they um, don't know that relationship with good books, with falling in love with authors and reading everything that they wrote, and having that wonderful sense of privacy that kids get from curling up with a book. There is a sense of privacy and being able to really be in a world on your own um, that uh, is not achievable in the internet, um, because you're continuously, as even as you're sitting there alone, often you're continuously interacting with other people. Um, um, and then that also made me think about the connection between the internet and childhood obesity. Um, I remember that we used to run all day long when we were kids, um, and uh, uh, our parents really had no idea what we were doing between breakfast and dinner, and didn't really ask for specifics either. And uh, no doubt would have been a little shocked if they had found out. And then thinking about our next conversation on youth violence, as social workers, we're working on the front lines with people who are suffering, and um, it's our responsibility to um, educate um, about um, these myths and replace these myths with facts. And that's true not only um, uh, in our workplaces, but especially true in our own um, circles, in our own communities, um, and in our work on a larger social level, um, if we're doing that, because we're in a position to be very powerful educators um, and to counter those myths that have such insidious effects. Um, you had some wonderful thoughts about who benefits from from furthering these myths, um, and one thread that ran throughout your posts is the idea that um, these these myths serve a purpose for those who have power and privilege because um, they tend to keep society stratified um, and effectively disenfranchise underrepresented um, people who actually might advocate for social justice and social change. Um, so there is a very backward and faulty logic operating here um, that justifies racism. Um, for example, um, children, um, especially children of color, are um, uh, uh, prone to violence and therefore have to be um, tried as adults, etc. Um, and does that sound at all to you like the European pronouncement that um, uh, Indians were savages and had to be either eliminated or whitewashed and made into a servant class? It's um, it's strikingly familiar, um, and if you hear right wing media and political rhetoric, you you notice a pretty consistent undertone of keeping white people safe from violent brown people. Um, it's comical. It would be comical if it wasn't so um, um, horrific. Um, and several of you mentioned that instilling fear um, um, for the um, purpose of short-term political gain um, feeds compliance, and that also keeps the society uh, uh, from changing from its current stratification. Um, and there are uh, these myths are played out in egregious ways um, in institutional policy. As you know, there are more black men incarcerated today than were enslaved in 1850, and once you are convicted of a felony, you're pretty uh, um, you lose so many human rights, not only the right to vote, but it becomes difficult to support yourself and your family, and it becomes difficult to participate fully in a positive way in society. Um, maybe one theme we have here is that um, uh, political and corporate America, see, which are often the same thing, um, uh, capitalize on the amygdala, um, uh, and promoting this fear of anyone who um, diverges from the master narrative. Um, After all, fear and critical thinking are incompatible, um, and that's pretty good news for the corporate bottom line if corporations are running prison complexes or um, um, you mentioned the kids for sale um, phenomenon, um, and there are many other examples of that. Just on an unrelated point, think about the billions of dollars on cosmetics that are spent because um, women are convinced that um, they need to change their appearance in order to be beautiful. I mean, that's really pretty wild if you think about it. Um, this fear mongering um, as a political tool is actually not unlike and abusers instilling fear in their targets in the interest of maintaining power and control, right? Um, so um, uh, your your conversations were just very rich and um, uh, full of the kind of critical analysis that sadly is so hard to come by these days. And so I celebrate I celebrate you all and look forward to our upcoming conversations.